This is Rudayna Abdo with Urban Nibbles. Today I'm joined by Parvathi Nampoothiri, who is a manager of urban design in one of GTA's larger cities. Welcome, Parvati.
Thank you, Rudayna. Happy to be here.
Great to have you. Parvati, we have all been in lockdown mode for the last couple of months. So I'm very interested to hear what some of the bright sparks and surprises that have emerged from a design and planning perspective that you see either in your city or across other cities in the GTA or elsewhere.
There has been quite a few surprising outcome. When we started off, we didn't know what we were facing, really. I mean, we went into it thinking it's something that's going to go away. Initially, the thought was, oh, it's not too serious. Coronavirus is just another flu. We all started there. And as we understood the seriousness of it all and we started working from home, there were a lot of concerns. I live in a high-rise building and we have to take the elevator to go down. A lot of my colleagues do the same thing. And one of the first concern was, how do we tackle the spread in a very dense urban environment? And initial literature pointed towards cities being the most difficult environments to tackle coronavirus spread. There were high chances of people getting sick through physical interaction. We have to be all in the same shops and on the same streets, and how do we manage that? And interestingly, the data that came out later, and more recently, the study that was done by World Bank, comparing a lot of cities in China, for example, really shows that the spread is managed well in high density urban environments versus sort of lower density kind of suburban environment and small cities. And there could be many factors contributing to that. And we can't really simplify what's happening within a certain region or a country. There are different systems in place. But at the same time, we can see from data in GTA or even New York, Manhattan, for instance, is least impacted compared to the other communities around, like Bronx or Brooklyn. They have higher cases of COVID-19. And it clearly shows part of the issue being people who live there are probably more affluent in sort of the city core, the urban core areas. And they can afford to be independent, to separate, may have white collar jobs that allows them to stay home and work from home. There could also be other factors such as access to healthcare and better nutrition and all of that. But beyond that, I think there's also a link to the access to services, that cities are better equipped, large cities are better equipped to provide the kind of healthcare that its people need. There's a good distribution of goods and services that people can access to. And the initial worry that as urban planners and urban designers, we promote density, we promote good density. We don't want the suburban sprawl to continue the way it does today. And for us, this is a great news, to be honest, because it means urban environments are resilient. We can make it work, and density is not bad if it's done right. So that's a good message, I think, that came out of it. And the second one was the creativity that people have shown over the last few weeks. Actually, it's been, like you said, 8 to 10 weeks in many parts of the world. And one of the most interesting outcome that I find is the way people have used tactical urbanism to convert their roadways into spaces for people, for biking, for playing, for walking. We've clearly understood that, 1.5 meter sidewalk, which is the standard, or which used to be the standard in Ontario, for example, it's not enough. 1.5 meter means nobody's on the sidewalk anymore. People are either walking on grass or on the pavement. And it's fine. People are keeping the distance, and we are walking on road and running on road, and cars are moving away from us. But I think that leaves a lot of room for cities to take this opportunity and convert these spaces, give the space back to the people. Something we've been talking about in our literature, and we've drawn a lot of sketches and done renderings showing how streets can convert to these beautiful spaces for people. But it's a great opportunity to make it happen. Summer has come, and we really need to act on it.
Well, it's very interesting, actually. The density part is probably, I wonder if it's contested, I'm sure, because you hear the
it is contested.
Density But it's really interesting to hear that I didn't know that about Manhattan versus the other New York, Greater New York area cities.
Yeah.
And Toronto, of course, is a very vertical city. Both the
Mm-hmm.
suburbs and the city center goes in high in verticality. So that's refreshing, because I think that's been a big worry on the urban design aspect for those of us who've been working hard trying to get these densities higher. So
and that's also, absolutely. And it speaks to density done right versus overcrowding and internal densities. And that those are two different things. And the whole housing affordability issue has come to the forefront through this as well. I mean, that's probably the least bright of the outcome, I would say. How people struggle through their livelihood being lost, and people who were struggling to begin with are probably finding themselves in worse situations. So cities like Toronto, that's notorious for being unaffordable, will need to do a lot more to bring in affordable housing and ensuring people can maintain their space in time of crisis, that they won't be evicted, that they won't have to find other means to get by.
The whole inequality and equity equation, it's really, this virus has shone such a spotlight on it in so many aspects.
Absolutely.
On the housing, on the healthcare, education, access to food, access to services, globally. We see it
globally.
As you say, we see it in the big cities that we live in the refugee communities where some of my work is, in poor areas, other parts of the world. And it's also jumping to the other point on the shifting of the land, or the street grid, the street cross section, with giving more towards the pedestrian realm. I know this is a big part of the work both you and I have been involved in throughout our career. So this could be an opportunity also to bring better dialogue with accommodating the use and the space that's given to cars and other modes, and the shifting of that cross section. Is there more acceptance of this now amongst your colleagues in other departments, would you say?
Yes, there's a lot of discussion happening. I mean, when I look at a city's response, or as an urban designer's response or a planner's response, I think we need to understand the short term versus the long term, and what might be successful while we are in this pandemic. Will it actually sustain itself as we move forward? And this is with every aspect of this pandemic response that we are seeing. So we are talking about this season, for instance. Businesses are finding it really hard to survive. Restaurants, especially the whole food and beverage industry, has been struggling. There's been a lot of takeaways and delivery services that's still going on, has been active. But we also see and hear a lot of news about restaurants closing, and its livelihood of a lot of people. And I'm sure people who are in the serving industry, they would like to come back to work. And summer is the season when everybody wants to be outside. So we are looking at passing a bylaw, for example, to allow for these restaurants to expand their patio into the public realm. And how do we make it happen? And one of the things we've been discussing quite actively is how we can be very proactive in providing the guidance for it. And I recently came across a NACTO guidance on that. Converting public spaces. I have to dwell a little deeper into it, but they've always been at the forefront of sort of the fight for streets. And I think that's going to really help to have guidance that can help all cities to kind of come together and say, here's your space. This is what you can do. Provide a set of guidelines saying, how do you want to organize your traffic versus the zones for people to come out and sit and enjoy the weather in a safe manner. And that really help these businesses as well. So say you have a street that has 2 lanes of traffic and parking bays, make it a one-way street and use the parking bays as spaces for restaurants to spill out, and reduce the travel lane so people have enough space to walk around it, and kind of manage traffic in a more meaningful way, but at the same time allowing sort of that safe distance. And we need to understand it's time for us to, if any time was more perfect, this is it, to make sure that vehicular traffic has the least priority right now. People are using sort of personal modes. People are biking more, walking more. Um, Everybody's trying to explore their own neighborhoods more than taking their cars and driving to other locations. So I think it's a great opportunity, and we are talking about it. And what we do this summer, I hope we can sustain even when the pandemic is over, that this mentality, this understanding that we can enjoy our environment on foot and on bike, that's if that can sustain even more, if that behavior spreads to more people, then that would be fantastic.
Mm-hmm. To that point of using the public space for expansion of food and beverage, the Netherlands, I know, are talking about that as well. So how can you infringe or move into expand the seating, partly for the spacing, but also to accommodate more people in this beautiful weather that's coming up. So I think that's great. So maybe cities can share from each other as well, these lessons.
Mm-hmm.
As far as land use, and now we're seeing everybody's been working remotely, and use of office space has been, I think a lot of businesses are probably rethinking even how much they invest in real estate and to what degree workers return to office space and to what extent. Some cities do form-based zoning, others do use-based zoning. Mm-hmm. What do you see, how do you think that's going to impact zoning practice in general? Do you think this could be an inflection point where we finally move to the next phase of figuring out how to manage our land uses and distribution of uses and flexibility of uses, I guess?
Yeah, I think that's going to be a big outcome of it. Absolutely right, Rudayna. I think we are going to see some change in the way we look at policy for land use planning. So right now, obviously, we do our use-based planning. We have residential, we have employment uses, we have mixed use areas, but they are quite defined. If you take out an official plan today from any city, you should see a land use map that still has those blocks of colors. And very few areas in a city is shown in that kind of mixed use zone where a lot of different uses can happen. And I think with this, we're going to see a spread of these uses into what was more traditionally defined as residential uses. I mean, if I'm working from home and my husband is working from home, is this really a residential use? No, it's quasi-office at the same time. So we need to sort of start looking at people's ability to run potentially their own businesses from there. And today there are regulations that allow you to do that, but they're all exceptions to the norm. Now, if that exception becomes the norm, then how do you tackle that? And I think that there can be quite a few interesting outcomes, apart from us changing the policy to address this new need. There's also the implementation is always economy driven, the way I see it. And what is the economy going to do in terms of addressing the change? How are we going to design homes differently, for example? How are we going to make sure that when I work from home, if I am in a low density suburban environment, where do I go get my coffee? I don't want to go take my car and drive to a commercial plaza that's 15 minutes away. I might want to walk and get my coffee. And that creates opportunities for businesses to come in and say, you know what, it's not bad. We have a significant daytime population to make this coffee shop successful. And this has been a kind of a conflict that we've always seen in land use planning and sort of master plan communities, where we come with this notion of creating beautiful, complete communities, walkable neighborhoods. But when you plan these low density neighborhoods and you provide a node saying, oh, this node is going to have all the commercial uses that supports this neighborhood, it never materializes because the economy doesn't support it. Businesses cannot survive in a bedroom community. No coffee shop can survive in a bedroom community. So you're looking at nighttime uses, weekend uses, and that's mostly service industry. You know, you may have a nail salon or a dry cleaner surviving in those kind of commercial environments, but no food and beverage industry can really survive there. They need that density of population. They need the mix of uses, the daytime traffic, and that could change. That could potentially change, and these sort of complete communities may end up becoming complete again. And that proliferation of mixed use designation, more or less, into these purely residential zones. I think that's going to help. And the definition of office, that you raised a really interesting point. The policy as such is quite distant from reality. The way we designate jobs per hectare is based on a certain square footage of office space assumption per employee. That's already way off. The way we calculate is based on a traditional office environment. Now we see a lot more of agile office spaces. The space per person has actually dropped by 50%. So you're seeing more shared environments. The ratio for parking is a lot higher in the suburban office environment, where you have more employees per square foot compared to what the policy says. So we face all these challenges, but as more people work from home and there's not as much need for corporate office environments with a sea of parking around it, you can actually start repurposing it, and you can kind of have more fine-grained uses in those spaces. So it really shakes things up, the way we do traditional planning, but I think it's a good change. I think if we do it right, good things can come out of it.
Yeah. And I think there's going to be a lot of how do we deal with flexibility of space? So the conversions for existing stock. So we've got millions of square feet of ready stock that may not be used for that intended use. So this then can have the impact, assuming we're seeing impacts on the building codes as well.
Absolutely.
And all that goes into that, and how we regulate and design our building forms. So I think we really could be at a huge inflection point on all of these. And also the distribution, and if we were to talk about the various different uses we've mentioned, what about on the healthcare, on the health services perspective? I remember when I first moved to the Toronto area a few decades ago, there was a conglomeration of the hospitals were all aggregating, and then you had mega hospitals serving larger regions and then smaller distribution of clinics throughout. Do you see, as with the healthcare being the provision of healthcare and the distribution of healthcare services, have you seen any differences across maybe different cities, how they handle it in different areas?
We haven't started talking about that as a response to COVID-19 pandemic, but I think one of the outcomes of this is a conscious effort to create more decentralized communities where you can access services, including healthcare. It could mean food services, personal services, all within sort of within a community, not having to go far to get the service that you need. And I think that's where sort of that 15-minute neighborhood concept that works well in high density urban environments, but has traditionally failed in suburban environments, that may come back, because now we are in place. What we do throughout the day is happening in one place, which means we have the ability to access those resources in close proximity. And maybe one of the outcome of this, and I'm not an expert in the healthcare sort of response to the pandemic and how we sort of deal with future pandemics. Obviously, this isn't the first pandemic and it's not going to be the last one. But what do we learn from this experience in terms of decentralization? And does it mean that the clinics can be better equipped to deal with the sort of that neighborhood and the community, and more serious cases are transferred to hospitals? And there is some efficiency in terms of having centralized facilities that have the equipment and the resources in terms of staffing, doctors, and all of that, versus the clinics kind of dealing with the local areas. I'm not sure what the right answer is, but decentralization seems to have worked, and those communities that have access in a more localized areas seem to have done better in terms of cases not spreading as much and managing their own resources in these environments. So I'm sure the experts would have some changes brought in as part of that, as a way to respond for this COVID-19 situation, which is going to last for who knows until when, and for the next pandemic that may come about in years or decades from now. Yeah. But one of the decentralization aspects, just to dwell on that a little bit longer, in terms of food industry, and I find that it's very anecdotal not based on massive data or research, but in my neighborhood, there are 4 grocery stores, pretty large ones that I can walk to. And we never run out of anything. We did run out of toilet paper, but that was everywhere.
Yeah.
But other than that, I mean, we were able to not worry about food security. And I kind of wonder about all those communities that are traditionally food deserts to start with. And few of my friends who actually live in affluent suburbs had to line up for hours to get into their grocery stores because there were very few, very large stores really far apart, and everybody drove to one of those and had to wait long hours to get in. So there is a benefit in decentralization, I think. That's a comparison to healthcare.
Yeah, and this could be the demise of big box retailing as well, which has such massive implications on neighborhoods in the first place, in any case.
Absolutely.
Well, now just wrapping up, we are in this mindset of crisis management and crisis planning. And at some point we're going to be back to some kind of normal. What should we carry forward with us, do you think? Some of the practices that are really working very well, that could be a threat of being left behind, that we should make sure that we bring forward with us.
I think there's going to be a lot more focus on public health related data. You know, we've been working on making our communities and cities smarter. There's a lot of discourse on smart cities and intelligent communities. And I see there's a very strong argument towards creating a good, well-managed environment to communicate public health data with public, really, with the communities, to manage potential spread, to inform people of what the hotspots are, to give real-time data and help people make the decision for themselves and giving them choices on how they can kind of manage their own environments. Right now, the cities that have done well, Seoul, South Korea is a good example where they have implemented a very robust system of public health data, and that really helps people understand how their community is doing. If there's a hotspot, 10 kilometers away, they can choose to stay away from that neighborhood or that area. And I think that's really important, to be aware, to be educated. And as we move towards, everyone has a cell phone these days. Everyone has, well, most people have access to data. And maybe it's, we need to make sure that more and more people have access. This has been a challenge from an education point of view, for example, as schools close. TD Toronto District School Board, where my daughter goes to school, they sent an email about personal laptops and computers that some families may not have access to that. And that kind of makes you realize, yes, this is a challenge. Data is not, we take it for granted, but it's not something that can be taken for granted for a lot of people. But I think there's a value in that. And as data becomes cheaper and more people can have access to it, we have to find ways to use that information, making sure all the regulations and the privacy aspect of it is maintained, but again, make sure that it's used for good. And I feel like there's going to be some amount of investment happening on that front by a lot of cities and a lot of higher level governments. And I think another aspect that's going to remain is, you brought up flexibility, Rudayna, earlier. And it's in terms of land use, yes, that needs to happen. And it's planning, 30 years down the road. Most land use plans are established for decades. But also flexibility in terms of spaces. When we talk about commercial spaces or the office spaces that you mentioned, how can we make sure that we can adapt them for other uses? And that needs to be in our minds all the time. It's not just about coronavirus or a pandemic. It could be flood, it could be tornadoes, environmental factors. That will require us to respond to extreme events. And how do we make sure that there are spaces that can be adapted for those uses? Like read somewhere about hotels being used as shelters to combat homeless people from getting infected. And it's not sustainable from an economic point of view in the future, potentially, but when in time of a need, we need to have these spaces. So sports stadiums, for instance, that are sitting empty these days, what can we use that for? Community centers that are completely, my office is just sitting there. Many other offices are today. So adaptability and flexibility are going to be huge, and we need to seriously start thinking about it.
And the retail sector will be impacted, I think, as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
And as far as what should we definitely leave behind that could easily be carried forward in our practice as planners, what would you wish that we can just make sure we don't carry forward with us post-pandemic?
Do you mean a new practice that we are doing now, or?
Yeah, maybe practices that we've been doing, and we're just so ingrained in doing, and I think this is the right thing. I always joke that as a profession, our profession will always be around, because we're always going to be making up for the mistakes of the past generation, or even our own mistakes.
Yes, and we have to fix them. This is a great profession. We'll never be outdated because we'll always have problems to solve.
Exactly. So can you think of things that we would, from now, our current practices that are, it's a good time to shed them and not take them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the big ones that I was always very keen on is the shared economy. And it's pre-pandemic, of course, that has taken a big hit in this environment. So shared mobility, shared space, like, call it Airbnb or Uber, whatever that may be. I kind of saw that as a way of optimizing our resources in many ways. And maybe not the exact outcome the way we use it. It doesn't mean the number of cars on the road have gone down. They're probably gone up because now you have a lot of Uber drivers just circling around, or Airbnb has really not been the sort of, it hasn't offered affordability. In fact, it has had the opposite effect in certain neighborhoods, causing people to evict their tenants and put it up as Airbnb because they make more money out of that. Regardless of the outcome, I think shared economy has a crucial role to play in our lives moving forward. And it can help solve some problems if it's done right, if it's regulated well, and if it's ideally it self-regulates, to be honest. And that has taken a huge hit. Now we are moving towards more personal space and personal environment, personal automobile. And I do worry at times, although we see that there are not as many cars on the road because people are working from home. When it all goes away, how much time will it take for us to be very comfortable getting into a crowded subway or a streetcar? How long will it take for us to, use a shared car, or live in Airbnb spaces, or share our own home with others? And I kind of hope that we can find a way to make it work, and make it work well. Think through, if Airbnb failed today, maybe there's an opportunity to think about, okay, how can we redefine it? How can it be more resilient and more significant in terms of what it offers to the community, rather than just a way for people to make money, really. So I would hope there's more opportunities for less personal things and more shared economy.
Well, I love ending on that note, and that also reminds me of a concept that you and I have talked about for many years, codomus, of how we can cohabitate in a way which doesn't infringe on personal privacy as well, and in this case also getting onto the health aspects. So thank you very much for that perspective, and I think this is a great note to end on. I'm a huge fan of the shared economy and using these different techniques and technologies of doing things differently with the right intent. And I think you're right. I think there's going to be a lot of rethinking of those, but let's not throw them out. Let's rethink how they can work to the benefit of what they were originally intended for. So a lot to think about. And thank you for the very rich conversation and interesting thoughts. And very much looking forward to continuing this also in the future.
Thank you, Rudayna. This was fantastic. Always amazing to talk to you, and really enjoyed it.
Oh, likewise to you, my dear. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.